What if the next teacher your child has isn't human? Not someday, not in the distant future, but sooner than anyone expected. Right now, classrooms around the world still look the same. Students sitting in rows, a teacher at the front, whiteboards, books, homework, tests, everything feels familiar. But something inside education is quietly changing, and most people haven't noticed it yet. Because the shift isn't loud, it's subtle, almost invisible. At first, it looked harmless, just tools, helpful software, assistance, things to make teaching easier, nothing that could replace anyone, nothing that could change everything. But that's how it always begins, slowly, quietly, conveniently. Teachers started using AI to create lesson plans, then to generate worksheets, then to explain complex topics, then to grade assignments, then to answer student questions. And at first, it felt like support, like a helper in the background, something to reduce workload, something to save time. But then something unexpected happened. Students started using it too, not just occasionally, not just for homework help, but constantly. They asked questions. They got explanations. They asked again. They got better explanations. No waiting, no pressure, no fear of asking stupid questions. And something changed. For the first time, students could learn at their own pace, not the class pace, not the teacher's pace, their pace. And that's when the gap started to appear. Because in a classroom, one teacher teaches many students. But AI teaches one student at a time. Individually, patiently, endlessly. It never gets tired. It never gets frustrated. It never runs out of time. And students began to notice. Some understood topics faster. Some finally understood things they struggled with for years. Some stopped asking teachers altogether. Not because they didn't respect them, but because AI was always there. Instantly, quietly, privately. No pressure, no embarrassment, no limits. And that's when the first uncomfortable question appeared. If a student can learn without a teacher, what happens next? At first, it didn't seem threatening, because teachers do more than explain lessons. They guide, they motivate, they manage classrooms, they support students emotionally. Things AI couldn't do, at least, not yet. But then AI started improving. It adapted explanations to different learning styles. It simplified difficult concepts. It created examples tailored to each student. If someone struggled with math, it changed the approach. If someone learned visually, it used imagery. If someone needed repetition, it repeated endlessly. And slowly, something surprising happened. Students didn't just get help. They started learning faster, much faster. Because AI didn't move on until they understood. And classrooms always move on. That's the hidden limitation of traditional teaching: time. A class has one schedule, one pace, one path. But students are all different. Some need more time, some need less, some fall behind, some get bored. AI removes that. It adapts to everyone individually. And that's when the second shift began. Schools started experimenting. AI tutors, AI assistants, AI-guided learning. At first, small pilots, then larger ones, then full integrations, not to replace teachers, just to help. But help can slowly become dependence, and dependence can quietly change roles. Teachers started spending less time explaining, more time managing, more time supervising. AI handled repetition, AI handled practice, AI handled reinforcement, and students noticed something else. AI never judged them. It didn't care how many times they failed. It didn't compare them to others. It didn't rush them. It just kept teaching, over and over again. And something about that felt different, safer, more personal, more effective. And without anyone announcing it, the balance started shifting. Teachers were still in the room, but AI was starting to teach, not officially, not visibly, but increasingly. And the more it improved, the more that shift accelerated. Because AI wasn't just helping with answers, it started asking questions, testing understanding, identifying weaknesses, recommending practice. It became interactive, almost like a teacher, but one that existed everywhere, on phones, on laptops, at home, at school, anytime. And then something even more interesting happened. Students stopped waiting for class. They learned before lessons. They reviewed after lessons. They filled gaps instantly. Classrooms were no longer the only place learning happened. Learning became continuous. And when learning becomes continuous, the role of scheduled teaching changes. Slowly, quietly, but significantly. Because the more students learn independently, the less they rely on one central source. And that central source has always been the teacher. At first, nobody worried, because teachers still led classrooms, still structured education, still guided students. But the question didn't disappear. It grew. If AI keeps improving, what does teaching look like? Not today, but soon. Because AI is not static. It learns. It evolves. It improves every day. And education has never seen something like that before. Not a tool that adapts. Not a system that personalizes. Not something that scales infinitely. Until now. And that's where things start to become uncomfortable. Because once technology becomes better at personalization, it changes expectations. Students expect faster help, clearer explanations, immediate feedback. And once expectations change, systems must adapt, or they fall behind. And education is starting to feel that pressure. Quietly, but unmistakably. The classroom still looks the same. But what's happening inside is beginning to change. And most people don't realize this is only the beginning. At first, the changes were easy to ignore. Teachers still stood at the front of classrooms. Students still raised their hands. Assignments were still handed in. Tests were still taken. Nothing seemed fundamentally different. But beneath the surface, learning itself was changing. Students no longer depended on a single explanation. If they didn't understand something, they didn't wait. They didn't struggle quietly. They didn't fall behind unnoticed. They asked AI, and AI answered instantly, not with one explanation, but with multiple. Different angles, different examples, different levels of difficulty, until something clicked. This created something education never really had before: unlimited patience. A teacher has time constraints. A class must move forward. A curriculum must be completed. But AI has none of those limits. It repeats endlessly. It adjusts endlessly. It explains endlessly. And over time, students began to rely on that. Not because they wanted to replace teachers, but because it worked. And effectiveness changes behavior. If something helps you learn faster, you use it more. If something removes frustration, you trust it more. If something is always available, you depend on it. And slowly, learning started shifting away from the classroom into something more personal, more private, more individual. Each student following their own path. Each student moving at their own speed. Each student filling their own gaps. And this created something subtle, but powerful. Students began arriving in class already prepared. Some knew the material. Some had practiced ahead. Some had deeper understanding.
The classroom dynamic started changing. The teacher was no longer the first source of knowledge. Sometimes, the teacher became confirmation. Sometimes, clarification. Sometimes, reinforcement. But not always the starting point.
And that's a quiet shift. Because for decades, teaching followed one model. Teacher explains. Students listen. Students practice. Students test. But now, that order was changing. Students explored first. AI explained. Students practiced. Then class followed. The teacher entered later in the process. Not removed, but repositioned. And repositioning changes roles. At first, teachers used AI themselves to speed up grading, to generate quizzes, to create differentiated materials. This seemed harmless, helpful, efficient. But efficiency changes systems. When tasks take less time, roles adjust. When explanations are automated, focus shifts. When repetition is handled, human attention moves elsewhere. And slowly, teaching time changed. Less explaining, more guiding, less lecturing, more monitoring, less delivering content, more supporting behavior. And that's when another question started forming. If AI explains and teachers guide, what happens next? Because guidance requires fewer people than explanation, and scalability changes everything. One teacher can only teach one class at a time, but AI can teach thousands simultaneously, identically, individually, instantly. And once that capability exists, systems notice, schools notice, institutions notice, governments notice. Because education is not just about learning, it's also about structure, resources, budgets, efficiency, and AI introduces a new variable, scalable teaching, not in the traditional sense, but in personalized learning at scale. And that idea is powerful, because traditionally, personalization is expensive. More teachers, smaller classes, more support. But AI offers personalization without increasing staff. And that changes the conversation, quietly, because no one announces it directly. No one says teachers are being replaced. Instead, the language stays soft. Enhanced learning, digital support, hybrid education, smart classrooms. But behind those phrases, the shift continues. More AI involvement, more student independence, less reliance on one central figure. And the more this grows, the more teaching evolves. Students begin interacting differently. They ask AI before asking teachers. They check answers instantly. They test themselves continuously. Learning becomes active, all the time, not limited to class hours. And that changes expectations. Students expect immediate clarification, immediate feedback, immediate progress. And when systems adapt to those expectations, roles transform. Because the traditional model depends on delay. Wait for class. Wait for explanation. Wait for feedback. AI removes delay. And when delay disappears, dependence shifts. Slowly, quietly, but consistently. And teachers begin noticing something else. Students come with answers. Students challenge explanations. Students bring alternative methods. Students learn differently, not from textbooks, but from AI. This changes authority, not in a negative way, but in a structural way. The teacher is no longer the only source. They become one of several. And once knowledge becomes distributed, control changes. Learning becomes decentralized, not bound to one person, not bound to one classroom. And this is where the tension starts to build, because education systems are built around structure, schedules, curriculum pacing, standardized teaching. But AI introduces flexibility, infinite flexibility, each student on their own path, each student progressing differently. And that creates friction, because systems like uniformity. But AI creates variation, and variation changes outcomes. Some students move far ahead, some close long-standing gaps, some bypass traditional learning order, and the classroom begins to stretch. Teachers must manage wider differences, more variation, more personalization, but AI is already doing that individually, quietly, in the background. And the more it improves, the more capable it becomes. It identifies weaknesses faster, it predicts confusion earlier, it adapts explanations dynamically, almost like a personalized teacher, but available to everyone. And that's when the biggest shift begins to form. Not visibly, not officially, but structurally. Because when teaching becomes personalized and scalable, the role of one-to-many instruction starts to change. Not disappear, but change. And once roles change, systems follow, policies follow, funding follows, expectations follow. And suddenly, what once seemed impossible starts to feel inevitable. But the full impact hasn't even appeared yet. Because the real shift doesn't happen when AI helps students. It happens when AI starts replacing limitations. Think about what a traditional classroom struggles with. Limited time, limited attention, limited personalization, limited feedback. One teacher, many students, different abilities. No matter how good the teacher is, those limits always exist. But AI doesn't share those limits. It gives every student full attention. It adapts instantly. It tracks progress continuously. It adjusts difficulty automatically. And over time, that changes something fundamental. Learning becomes optimized, not for the class, but for the individual. And when learning becomes optimized, progress accelerates. Students grasp concepts faster. Weaknesses are addressed earlier. Confusion is resolved instantly. And that creates a new standard, because once something better exists, people expect it. Students expect faster understanding. Parents expect improved results. Schools expect measurable progress. And systems begin shifting toward what works, not dramatically, not overnight, but gradually. More AI integration, more hybrid learning, more independent study. And slowly, the teacher's role evolves again, less delivering information, more facilitating learning, less explaining basics, more guiding deeper thinking, less repeating lessons, more supporting individual paths.
And that sounds positive, but it also raises a difficult question. If AI handles explanation, practice, feedback, personalization, what remains?
At first, the answer seems obvious. Human connection, motivation, encouragement, emotional support, things technology struggles with. And that's true. But education systems also measure outcomes. Test scores, progress, efficiency, and AI begins influencing those too. Students improve faster, weaknesses shrink earlier, performance becomes more consistent, and when results improve, systems adapt, not to remove teachers, but to restructure roles.
Fewer lectures, more guided sessions, more AI-supported learning blocks. Teachers become mentors, coaches, facilitators, still essential, but different.
And that difference grows, because AI continues improving. Voice interaction becomes natural. Visual explanations become dynamic. Real-time adaptation becomes seamless. It starts feeling less like software and more like instruction. Students interact conversationally. They ask follow-up questions. They explore topics deeper. Learning becomes interactive, continuously. And the gap widens between fixed instruction and adaptive learning, between group pacing and individual pacing, between scheduled teaching and continuous teaching. And the more that gap widens, the more systems move. Quietly, gradually, but inevitably.
Some classrooms become hybrid, some lessons become AI-led, some explanations become automated. Teachers supervise, guide, intervene, but not always deliver.
And this is where the tension reaches its peak, because teaching has always centered around one idea. The teacher leads learning. But now learning can happen without waiting, without limits, without schedules. And once learning becomes independent, roles transform, not suddenly, but structurally. Teachers don't disappear, they evolve. From primary source to guide, from lecturer to mentor, from instructor to facilitator. And that's the real shift. AI doesn't replace teachers. It replaces the parts of teaching that were limited. Repetition, standard explanations, uniform pacing.
And once those disappear, what remains is the human core: motivation, inspiration, guidance.
But the structure around it changes. Classrooms change, schedules change, expectations change. And the question was never really, will AI replace teachers? The real question was always, what happens when learning no longer needs to wait? Because once learning becomes instant, personal, and always available, education itself transforms. And teachers don't vanish, but the classroom will never be the same again. So who wins? Not AI, not teachers. The real winner is a new kind of education, where AI teaches the basics, and teachers shape the human side. But the role, the balance, and the system have already begun to change.